The chamber of the Galactic Council was alive with sound, a storm of voices echoing through the vast hall. Towering delegates of countless species filled the tiers, their colors, shapes, and movements strange and varied, yet their expressions were united in something sharp and cruel: anticipation. They had gathered for a single purpose: to deliver punishment to the species they all despised, a species that had become a thorn in their pride. The humans. For years, the Council had debated how to deal with them. At first, they were treated as nothing more than a curiosity, a young race that had crawled into the stars with stubbornness rather than elegance. Then, when their resilience became known, when fleets that should have crushed them had instead vanished in silence, the Council's patience snapped. They needed to make an example of humanity. They needed to show the galaxy that even the most stubborn of creatures could be broken. And so, in whispers and shouts, the decision was made. Humanity would be cast into hell itself. The choice of punishment was a world that no one dared approach, a planet catalogued only in fearful tones: Class 15 Deathworld. To the Council's endless records, this planet was the peak of danger, the highest grade ever assigned to a living sphere. Most Deathworlds barely reached Class 7 or 8, their storms or predators enough to wipe out settlements in hours. Class 10 worlds were nightmares no one dared approach, filled with hostile environments that tore apart even the strongest technology. But Class 15, this was not a world, it was a nightmare given shape. The planet's air was poisonous to nearly every known race. The storms shredded ships in orbit. Its oceans boiled with predators that had devoured every scout drone ever sent, and its surface crawled with creatures larger than dreadnoughts. Mountains shifted like they were alive. The skies themselves spat fire, and even the soil was filled with venom that killed in moments. When the name of the planet was spoken, the chamber trembled with cruel delight. Here was the perfect punishment. No empire could endure such a place. No species had lasted even a day there. Scout teams had been lost in hours, machines torn apart, soldiers devoured. To send humans there would not simply mean death, it would mean humiliation. The Council would have proof for all to see that the so-called resilience of humanity was nothing but a myth. Their arrogance would end in screams carried through the galaxy. The decision was met with thunderous approval. Warlords hissed and clapped their claws together. Insectoid delegates clattered their limbs in harsh applause. The winged races screeched in delight. Even the cold, silent stone-skinned titans rumbled with approval. All of them wanted this. All of them wanted the galaxy to watch as humans, who had dared to endure where others had failed, finally collapsed. And so, with a vote that passed almost without opposition, the punishment was sealed. Across the galaxy, word spread quickly. Worlds lit up with news transmissions, carrying the decision like fire through dry grass. Traders carried the story into the outer systems, soldiers whispered it in their barracks, and citizens gathered to hear the tale repeated again and again. The reaction was always the same: satisfaction, relief, and excitement. At last, the humans would be destroyed. At last, the shame of their victories would be erased. At last, the elders who had warned of their danger would be proven wrong. Humanity would die, not in battle, but in humiliation. In hidden chambers, however, the elders lowered their eyes in sorrow. They had begged the Council not to push humanity, not to test them. They had warned again and again that humans were not like the others, that they grew stronger when pressed, that their patience was not weakness but the stillness of a predator waiting for the right moment. But no one had listened, and now the punishment had been set. The elders knew the truth. What the Council had chosen was not punishment. It was a mistake that would echo through the stars. And so, humanity was summoned. Ships were dispatched to gather the chosen exiles. They were not warriors or leaders, but ordinary men and women, colonists, farmers, workers, even children. The Council believed this would be the ultimate insult, to send not their soldiers but their common folk to a world that would kill them all. Shackled in transports, the humans were carried across the void. Yet even in chains, they did not break. Their faces were calm, their eyes steady. They did not beg for mercy, did not cry for release. They sat in silence, watching, waiting. The guards who transported them whispered among themselves, unsettled by the quiet. They expected fear. They expected tears. But there was none. Only silence. At last, the day came. The fleets gathered above the world, their ships vast and gleaming. Cameras hovered in orbit, broadcasting the moment across the galaxy. Billions of eyes watched from countless worlds as the humans were led into landing craft, their chains gleaming under the harsh light. The commanders of the fleets spoke proudly, declaring that the galaxy would finally be free of this plague, that no one would ever again whisper fear of humanity. The crowd of species across the stars roared in approval. The landing craft descended. The atmosphere of the planet boiled against their shields, storms screaming like monsters. Lightning tore across the skies, striking ships with fire. One by one, the craft broke through the clouds, vanishing into the poisoned air. The fleets above waited, eager to hear the screams of the humans, eager to see them collapse in terror. Probes hovered close, broadcasting images to every world. The galaxy leaned forward as one, watching with hungry eyes. The craft landed, their hatches opening to release the humans onto the burning soil. The air itself shimmered with venom, the ground writhed with crawling creatures, the sky thundered with storms that split mountains in half. This was not a world meant for life. This was death given form. The watchers across the galaxy smiled. They expected to see the humans fall instantly, clutching at their throats, their skin burning, their bodies broken in moments. But that is not what they saw. The humans stepped forward. They breathed in poison and coughed, but did not fall. They staggered under the storm winds, but did not retreat. Their eyes scanned the ground, their hands touched the soil, their minds already working. Within minutes, they began to move together, tearing apart their landing craft, building shelters from its remains. They dragged the wreckage into walls, lit fires against the storms, and stood shoulder to shoulder against the beasts that crept from the shadows. The galaxy leaned closer. This was not how it was supposed to be. Humanity was supposed to die. Humanity was supposed to break. But they did not. The first night fell, and the humans endured. Above, the council fleets waited, confusion spreading through their ranks. Across the stars, watchers whispered uneasily. The punishment had begun, but it was not going as they hoped. Humanity had been cast into hell itself. And instead of screaming, they stood. This was only the beginning. The sky above the Class 15 Deathworld churned like a living beast, clouds folding over each other in black waves, lightning crawling inside them like veins of fire. The ground trembled with slow, heavy heartbeats that did not belong to the planet but to the creatures moving beneath its skin. And the air had a sharp taste that burned the mouth and stung the lungs, yet the humans stood in a tight circle around the wrecked landing craft, their eyes open, their minds working, their hands already busy. They did not waste breath on panic. They did not waste time on blame. They took stock, counted tools, split tasks, tore panels from the hull and turned them into shields, cut wiring into snares, turned ribs of alloy into frames for a wall. One woman scraped a sample of the soil with a broken knife and it fizzed in the cup like angry water. Another held a strip of filter cloth over a vent and watched it darken. They spoke in short words, quick and simple. Do this, bring that, hold steady, and as the first shock of the poisonous wind hit, they crouched low and moved together. The storm tried to lift them and fling them like leaves, but they crawled, stubborn and patient, and reached the lee of a rock spine where the wind broke like a wave on stone. There they anchored the first sheet with melted struts. The metal screamed, the bolts glowed, but it held, and behind that thin barrier the air was a little less wild, a little less deadly. Enough to breathe if the filters sat tight on the mouth and nose, enough to think. The ground shook again, dust rose like smoke, and from the red haze a shape came forward on 6 jointed legs, taller than a man, a carapace ridged like razors, a mouth opening sideways to show rows of wet, grinding plates. It had the careful walk of a hunter that knows it cannot be hurt, but the front line of humans did not run. 3 lifted the curved belly panel they had cut from the craft and braced it. 2 knelt with metal poles sharpened to ugly points. The creature tested the wall with a hiss, smelled blood in its imagination, lunged, met the shield with a clang that rattled bones, and in that instant the poles drove up and under where the plates overlapped, not once, not twice, but until the legs folded and the heavy weight slid sideways. It kicked, it scraped, it bled a bit of fluid that smoked on the soil, but it stopped moving. The group did not cheer. There was no victory in this place, only breath. Only time. They learned from the body. They marked the seam that gave way. They copied the shape of the plates for armor patterns. They broke 2 legs free with a groan of effort and dragged them behind the wall as raw material. The storm screamed again. Thin needles of rain struck the metal and hissed like acid. They angled the plates to shed the worst of it and dug with broken trays to bury the edges. The trench filled with thick mud that smelled like rust and salt. And when another tremor rolled under their knees, they pressed their palms to the ground and felt the slow grinding of something deeper. Something that did not care about walls. They logged it in quick words: deep mover, direction east to west, unknown, keep watch. The light dimmed though it was still day. The clouds stacked higher. And in that gray half-night the horizon rose and fell with moving hills, backs of things traveling in herds. One of the older men whispered that on Earth there were stories about seas that looked calm until a whale surfaced. This was not calm, and those were not whales. Still they worked. Because work was life here. 2 cut the intake vents from the engine cone and turned them into funnels. 1 packed them with lead cloth for a crude scrubber. Another rigged a hand pump from a landing strut actuator. And they began pushing the burning air through the filters. It came out less sharp, still wrong, but survivable for a little while. They rotated breathers. They watched each other. For the slow stumble that meant the poison was winning, a boy of 12 tried to hide a cough and failed. A woman took his mask without drama and pressed it to his face, then kept working with her own cloth clenched in her teeth. There was no speech about heroics. There was only the choice to stand. The ground cracked 10 paces from the wall and a rope of black worms poured out, each as long as an arm. Blind round mouths ringed with hooks. They moved like liquid, searching for heat. A flay snapped to life and was thrown low. The worms surged toward it and wrapped tight until the flare burned out and the pile twitched in confusion. A lesson was written in a rough hand on a torn panel: heat lures, use decoy, and a line of scrap was laid as a false trail away from the shelter. The worms followed. The humans lived for another hour. When the lightning came down close, it did not strike the tallest point. It struck where the air tasted thickest. And that was where the filters were. Venting, the blast threw 2 people and set the cloth smoldering. But they had water, bitter and gray from a quick condenser set up that turned storm steam into drips, and they put it out. The water made their tongues numb. Someone said quietly, "This will kill us slow." Someone else said, "Slow is time. Time is learning. Keep boiling. Keep changing the layers." And the filters were rebuilt with ash and char to trap what the cloth missed. It helped just enough. The watchers in the hidden satellites above sent back images to the galaxy. Images of humans building against a sky that hated them. Of humans fighting things that had shredded armor drones. Of humans drinking water that cut the mouth and still standing up to work again. The feed drew crowds. They came to see fear, to see begging, to see collapse. Instead they saw small motions repeated 1,000 times. Hands moving, eyes scanning, bodies braced against the wind. The first night fell like a lid on a boiling pot. The stars were a sickly green behind the storm veil, and new sounds rose. Long low calls that came from all directions, answered by thudding footfalls and the crack of trees breaking like bones. Inside the wall the humans laid their tools in a ring and set watches. 3 to a side, 10 breaths on the wind, 10 breaths against the ground. Listen for change. A young man with a torn sleeve found his hands shaking. The old woman next to him wrapped his fingers around the pole and said simple words: hold. When it moves you push. When it stops you pull. When it bleeds you learn. The shadow that came at midnight did not roar. It flowed. A carpet of small bodies trying to climb the plates. Hooks clicking. A rain of bone shards fell from above as another creature tried to break the wall with weight. The plates bowed. The bolts sang. A crack began at the seam. And 6 people leaned their shoulders and backs to the metal while 2 rammed the braces home. The wall held. Barely. In the dim light no one saw the tears. They heard only the breath, steady, in and out. The storm eased just before dawn and a cold mist rolled in smelling of copper. In it the world looked closer. As if the land itself were leaning forward to see. The humans stepped out in a line, kept the wall at their backs, and moved to recover the traps set at dusk. 3 were sprung, 1 empty, 2 full. Inside lay insects like armored birds with sore jaws. The meat smoked where the poison still sweated from the skin. A test slice on a hot plate hissed but calmed after a long boil. A careful taste burned the throat and then faded. Not food yet, not safe, but a clue. They marked the steps: boil 3 times, ash layer, wait, and they set the jaw plates aside as knives. As the second day began, the planet showed more of its rules. The wind changed directions with a crack like a snapped cable. The sun punched through for heartbeats and turned the mist into a bright wall. In that light, shapes froze, then fled. Even the hunters feared the day here. That too was a note: move at dawn, brace at noon, run at dusk. The watchers far above wrote other notes none of the humans could see. Their logs filled with disbelief. The feed showed faces black with ashen eyes red from the air, and still the hands worked, still the bodies moved, and somewhere in the council a young envoy who had laughed the loudest now spoke the quietest, asking how many nights a people like this could survive. The answer came as evening fell again, when the ground lifted like a breath and a ridge split. A head the size of a transport rose, plated and old, eyes blind white, mouth like a cave rimmed with teeth that did not end. It tasted the air and turned toward the heat inside the wall. The humans did not scream. They moved. The fires went dark. The decoy line flared in 4 places at once. The thing turned and swung its head. Rocks shattered. 1 man fell and did not rise. 2 went back for him anyway. Because that is a rule older than storms. The beast struck the decoys until the flames died, then hunted by sound. But by then the wall was braced. The ground was laced with coils stripped from the engine. And when the jaw came down, the current leapt. The mouth spasmed. The head slammed the soil. The planet itself seemed angry at the trick and threw rain like knives. Yet for a long breath nothing moved. Then the humans moved first, always first, driving poles into soft places learned in seconds, pulling them out and driving again, until the great head slid away and the ridge closed. Not dead, only driven off, not triumph, only time bought. They stood in the wet and shook, with cold, with pain, with the shock of being alive, and then they lifted the fallen, and then they checked the braces, and then they wrote more rules on the metal wall with blackened fingers. And when the night finally settled, when the planet whispered new threats from the dark, the humans slept in turns, shallow, ready, and the ones awake stared into the storm and did not blink, because the truth had arrived quietly and sat with them like an old friend. This world would not stop. This world would not forgive. But neither would they, and far above the hidden watchers sent one last line before the feed cut for the cycle. Humans survived the first day on a Class 15 Deathworld. Adjust predictions. Adjust everything. The second night on the Class 15 Deathworld fell heavier than the first, as if the world itself understood. The humans had survived longer than expected and now meant to crush them with its true strength. The storms that had roared before now came in silence, sheets of black wind rushing low across the ground, pulling grit and ash into the air until breathing was like swallowing knives. The sky pulsed with green fire, silent lightning tearing holes in the clouds, and every hole revealed shadows moving above, winged predators that circled endlessly, waiting for weakness. The ground beneath the humans shifted again and again, as if the planet itself was restless, alive with the movements of creatures older than any empire in the galaxy. The council fleets in orbit leaned closer to their screens, waiting for the moment when humanity would finally collapse. The humans did not collapse. They adapted. Inside the thin shelter they had built, the air was stale and bitter, but it was theirs. Metal sheets buzzed under the pressure of the storm, and braces groaned with every gust, yet they held. Tools lay in a careful circle, water filters hissed with each pump, and traps waited along the perimeter. Their first day had been survival, nothing more. But the second night became something else. It became the beginning of control. When the wind dropped suddenly, when the silence felt sharp enough to cut, they moved. 2 stepped out with plates strapped to their arms and poles gripped tight, crouching low in the mist. The ground trembled with approaching weight, but the humans were ready. They had laid bait, strips of the first beast they had killed, the bitter flesh tied with scraps of cloth soaked in their own blood. The smell carried far in the poisonous air. The hunters came quickly, dozens of shapes crawling low, eyes glowing faintly, limbs clicking against the ground. The watchers in orbit leaned forward, expecting screams. Instead, they saw humans strike. Poles jabbed into soft joints, shields slammed down to pin limbs, stones rolled into pits where creatures were lured and trapped. It was brutal, fast, ugly, but it worked. When the swarm fled, 3 carcasses lay on the soil, their bodies twitching, steaming in the rain. The humans dragged them behind the wall. Inside, the carcasses were pulled apart piece by piece. Every plate of armor was stripped for shields, Every bone snapped into spear tips, every drop of venom carefully stored in hollowed struts. Nothing was wasted. A young girl, barely older than 13, watched the work with sharp eyes and pointed to the beast's gland pulsing faintly. "Fire," she said, remembering how the first corpse had smoked when its blood touched flame. The elders of the group nodded, and within hours they had built crude firebombs. Glass shards filled with fluid that burst in sparks when ignited. The storm outside raged on, but behind the wall, humans planned. They tested, they built, they prepared. Every strike of lightning showed their silhouettes bent over their work, and the watchers in orbit felt unease creep into their bones. This was not survival. This was learning. By dawn, the sky split open with a roar as a massive winged predator descended. Its wings spread wider than the wall itself, its scream shaking the ground. Its talons dug into the soil, and its mouth split open, dripping acid. The watchers in orbit held their breath. Surely now the humans would fall. But the humans had already seen it circling the night before. They had already marked its shadow, tracked its pattern, studied its descent. When it came, they were ready. The wall braced with poles. Nets woven from wiring and bone weights stretched across the gap. Firebombs waited in trembling hands. The beast dove, its mouth wide, its shadow covering the shelter. The humans lit the first bomb and hurled it upward. It burst against the creature's chest, fire racing across its scales. The beast screamed, clawing wildly, smashing against the ground. The nets snapped tight around its wings. The poles braced, bending but holding. And then the spears struck, dozens at once, driving into soft flesh beneath the armor. The beast thrashed, tearing the ground apart, shattering the outer wall, but it could not escape. When its final scream faded into the storm, the humans stood blooded but alive, their wall in ruins but their will unbroken. The council chamber across the galaxy erupted in shock. Billions had watched, waiting for death, and instead they had seen the impossible again. No species had ever survived a night on the Class 15 Deathworld. The humans had survived too. No species had ever slain one of the sky predators. The humans had done it with scraps and fire. The council leaders hissed and shouted in denial, but the truth had been broadcast to the stars. Humanity was not dying. Humanity was thriving. The humans did not celebrate. They buried their dead, rebuilt their wall with the beast's bones, and set more traps for the next night. Their silence was heavier than thunder, a silence that carried across the stars. For the galaxy, it was proof of something terrible. For the humans, it was only the beginning. Because the planet would not stop, and neither would they above the broken skies of the Class 15 Deathworld. Machines drifted in silence, hidden in the thick bands of cloud. They were council probes, countless small eyes watching, recording, and transmitting everything that happened on the surface. Their lenses saw through storm, their sensors pierced the haze, and their signals carried back to billions of waiting screens across the galaxy. Entire populations gathered in great halls, homes, and military stations to watch the spectacle. They came expecting fear, suffering, and finally death. Instead, what they saw unsettled them. The feeds showed humans moving across a landscape that killed everything else. They should have been broken, yet they worked with the calm rhythm of builders, not prisoners. They should have been hiding, yet they walked the open ground with weapons in hand, testing, learning. They should have been corpses by now, yet they lived. The watchers leaned forward, whispering uneasily. Some said it was luck. Others said it was illusion. But deep in their hearts, even the loudest voices of denial felt something colder: fear. In the council chambers, the warlords shouted over one another. "They are tricking us," one declared. "The feeds are false." But the elders shook their heads. The feeds could not lie, and the elders had seen this before. This was not trickery. This was humanity. On the planet below, the humans ignored the eyes in the sky. They knew they were being watched. The orbiting fleets and drones were no secret. But they did not care. They were too busy living. Their camp had changed. What had been a wrecked wall of metal and scavenged scraps was now a fortress. The bones of the winged predator formed arching gates. Plates of armor from fallen beasts had been hammered into shields that leaned against the walls. The humans moved in shifts, some working, some resting, some always standing watch. Children carried water filtered through ash and cloth, their faces smeared black but their steps steady. Men and women alike sharpened bone spears, fitted new heads to broken poles, tied wires into snares. One group dug pits lined with spikes, baiting them with chunks of steaming meat. Another group climbed the ridge to place crude markers, mapping the patterns of beasts that moved in the dark. Every motion was recorded by the probes, and every motion unsettled the watchers more. For the council had expected panic. Instead, they saw discipline. The probes zoomed closer, capturing the details of every act. A woman stitched hides into cloaks that shimmered with a natural oil, turning aside the poisonous rain. A man tested venom from a beast's gland, touching it to stone, to fire, to water, and marking down the reactions with a piece of char on metal scrap. A child no older than 10 drew a picture of the creature's weak spot in the dirt, while elders nodded in approval. The galaxy gasped. These were not the actions of the dying. These were the actions of survivors. And then came the storm. It rolled across the land like a wall of thunder, flattening trees, tearing rocks from cliffs. The probes caught the humans bracing, shields raised, walls reinforced. The storm screamed, but the camp stood. When the winds finally passed, the watchers expected to see ruins, to see bodies scattered. Instead, they saw the camp intact, the humans already repairing what little had broken. But the worst came at night. The probes caught movement, shadows slithering across the ground, crawling up from cracks, glowing eyes watching from the dark. A swarm of creatures, 100 strong, surrounded the camp. They moved like a tide, their claws scraping, their mouths gaping wide. The probes focused close, broadcasting every detail. Billions held their breath, waiting for the massacre. The swarm attacked. The humans answered. Firebombs lit the night, bursts of flame rolling through the creatures. Nets dropped from the walls, tangling dozens at once. Spears flew in arcs, striking joints and throats with precision. The humans moved as one, their lines holding, their shields braced. The swarm struck again and again, but each time, the humans adapted, changing their tactics, shifting their defense, turning the beast's strength against them. Hours later, when dawn broke, the ground outside the wall was littered with corpses. The humans stood, scarred and weary, but alive. The council chamber fell into silence. The warlords who had laughed now whispered in fear. Across the galaxy, billions watched with wide eyes. They had expected death. Instead, they had witnessed the impossible. And high above the storm, the probes sent one final image. A man standing atop the wall, his face streaked with ash, his eyes lifted not to the beasts but to the sky. He raised his spear slowly, pointed it at the heavens, and held it there. The message was clear. He knew he was being watched. And he did not fear them. The galaxy did. The world that was meant to kill them had instead become their teacher. Every day on the Class 15 Deathworld was supposed to be humanity's last. Yet each dawn came and still they stood. And with each dawn, they were stronger. What began as desperation was now turning into something more. A rhythm, a method, a way. The humans were no longer just surviving. They were shaping the planet itself into their weapon. The probes circling above recorded everything. Billions across the galaxy watched with hungry eyes, waiting for the moment when the humans would finally fail. Yet the images they received filled them not with satisfaction but with dread. Where other species had collapsed, the humans thrived. Where others had cowered, the humans attacked. The Deathworld had become a proving ground, and the humans were proving themselves in ways no one could have imagined. They learned quickly that every creature, no matter how monstrous, had a pattern. The six-legged hunters who prowled the ridges always attacked in pairs. The worm swarms moved toward heat but recoiled from sound. The winged predators circled 3 times before striking. Patterns, weaknesses, flaws, things that had once been mysteries to the Council's armies were now mapped in the dirt by human hands. Children could point to the horizon and tell when a beast would come. Elders marked cycles of storm and silence, turning chaos into knowledge. They turned the bones of the fallen into tools. The armored hides became shields and cloaks, slick with oil that repelled the poisonous rain. The jagged teeth became blades sharper than steel. Even the venom, once a death sentence, was harvested, diluted, and turned into traps that drove larger beasts away. Nothing was wasted. The planet threw its horrors at them, and they turned each horror into another step forward. The council watchers were horrified. "This is not possible," one delegate hissed in the chamber as he watched a broadcast. "No one adapts this quickly." But the elders only closed their eyes. "You were warned," one whispered. "This is the human way." The camp transformed. No longer just a wall of wreckage and bones, it became a fortress. Trenches lined the perimeter, filled with sharpened stakes dipped in venom. Nets strung with wire and beast sinew hung above the gates. Inside, shelters were raised from the ribs of fallen monsters, covered in hides that glowed faintly in the storms. Fires burned clean now, fueled by a strange black resin dug from the ground, the smoke sharp enough to repel scavengers. The water was filtered through layer after layer until it no longer burned the throat. Crops, tiny and fragile, sprouted in soil the council had declared dead. The humans tested, failed, tested again, and within weeks they had food. Above, the galaxy watched in disbelief. This was not a death sentence. This was colonization. Humanity was taming a world no other species could endure. But the true terror came when the humans stopped reacting and began hunting. A group of 20 set out from the fortress one morning, their armor patched from monster plates, their weapons a mix of sharpened bone and salvaged alloy. They moved in silence, coordinated without needing words. The probes followed, broadcasting their march to the stars. At the ridge, they set traps with precision, baited pits, firebombs hidden under stones, snares woven into the undergrowth. Then they waited. Hours passed, storms rolled, but the humans did not move. Their patience was colder than the void itself. At last, the prey came. A beast larger than any tank the council had ever built, its body covered in jagged spikes, its mouth glowing with chemical fire. It had slaughtered entire expeditions before, yet when it entered the humans' hunting ground, it never stood a chance. The first trap blinded it. The second crippled its leg. The third brought it crashing to the ground. And then the humans swarmed. They climbed its body, striking with precision, driving spears into joints, cutting deep into the glowing glands. The beast thrashed, roared, shattered trees, but within minutes, it was still. The probes broadcast the image of the carcass, a mountain of flesh surrounded by small figures who raised their spears in silence. Across the galaxy, billions shivered. The council chambers, once filled with laughter, were now filled with silence. And in that silence, one truth spread like fire. The humans were not dying. They were winning. The humans dragged the beast back to camp in pieces. Its hide became walls. Its bones became weapons. Its glands became fuel for fire that burned brighter than before. And when the next storm came, the camp glowed with light, unbroken, unafraid. The elders whispered to one another, their voices heavy with sorrow. "This is what we tried to tell you. They do not stop. Every strike against them only makes them stronger. This is the human way." And far below the storms, within their fortress of bone and steel, the humans kept building, kept fighting, kept learning. They did not speak to the galaxy. They did not boast. Their silence was more terrifying than any threat. For in that silence was a promise. If they could master a Class 15 Deathworld, there was nothing in the galaxy they could not master. The galaxy had wanted to see humanity die. Instead, they had witnessed the impossible. And the impossible was only beginning. The storm had raged for 3 days without pause, lightning tearing the sky in endless flashes, rain falling in sheets so sharp it cut skin, and wind screaming so loud it buried all other sound. The probes orbiting above captured nothing but chaos, the humans hidden behind their walls of bone and steel. Across the galaxy, watchers whispered that this must finally be the end. No species could endure such fury. The fortress would be ripped apart, the survivors scattered, their stubborn flames snuffed out at last. Yet when the clouds broke on the fourth day, when the green light of the strange sun shone through again, the humans still stood. Their wall leaned, their shelters smoked, their faces were cut and raw, but they lived. The feed zoomed closer, showing humans moving with grim purpose. They rebuilt again, faster than before. Children carried stones in small hands, stacking them beside the wall. Men and women lashed fresh poles with sinew, patched broken shields with new hides, poured ash into filters to replace what the storm had ruined. There was no pause, no despair. The storm had been only another lesson, and the humans had learned. Then the ground shook. Not a tremor like before, not the restless crawl of worms or the distant rumble of unseen herds. This was heavier, deeper, as if the planet itself were waking. From the ridge came a roar, low at first, then rising until it shook the bones of all who heard it. The cameras caught the shadow before the beast itself appeared. A colossal form moving slowly, its weight breaking stone, its bulk blotting out the horizon. The creature that emerged was larger than any predator yet seen. Its body was armored with jagged black plates that shimmered like metal. Its limbs were thick as towers, its claws longer than a man. Its head was crowned with horns, its mouth dripping a molten glow that hissed when it touched the soil. The probes zoomed in on its eyes, white, lidless, burning with hunger. This was no hunter of the night. This was a lord of the world, a creature that ruled the Deathworld itself. The galaxy gasped. This was the end. No human could face such a monster. Even the counselors who had mocked the elders felt their throats tighten as they watched. The beast roared again and began its charge toward the fortress. Inside the walls, the humans did not run. They had been preparing. The traps laid over weeks, the weapons forged from bone and venom, the bombs crafted from the glands of smaller beasts, all of it had been for this moment. Orders were given in sharp, simple words. Fires lit along the walls. Spears dipped in venom were set into racks. Nets stretched across the open ground. The humans braced. The beast struck first. It slammed against the wall, its horns tearing into bone, its claws ripping trenches in the soil. The wall shuddered, nearly breaking. Humans stumbled, but they did not fall. They held the braces, shouted to one another, reinforced the gaps. When the beast pulled back to strike again, the first wave of traps triggered. Spikes hidden in the ground shot upward, stabbing into its legs. It roared, a sound so loud it split the sky, and brought its claws down in fury. That was when the firebombs flew. Sparks rained against its armored plates, bursting into oily fire that clung and spread. The beast thrashed, rolling its bulk, but the fire only grew. From the wall, spears flew in arcs, dozens at a time, striking the creature's joints, its eyes, its soft belly. It howled and smashed the wall again, shattering part of it into rubble. Humans fell back, regrouped, and countered. Nets launched from weighted poles tangled its horns, pulling its head down for a precious moment. In that moment, a dozen warriors charged, leaping onto its back, driving their spears deep into gaps in the armor. The beast rolled, crushing two instantly, but the rest clung tight, stabbing again and again. The probes broadcast every second. Across the galaxy, billions sat frozen. They expected to see the humans torn apart, but what they saw instead was battle. Real battle. Not survival, not desperation. Strategy, teamwork, victory slowly being carved from the jaws of death. The creature's strength was terrible, but the human's will was greater. Each time it struck them down, more rose in its place. Each time it smashed a wall, they built another barrier with its broken pieces. Blood stained the soil, both human and beast, but the fight did not stop. Hours passed in the storm of claws and fire. At last, when the creature staggered, when its breath came in ragged bursts, the humans struck the final blow. A massive spear, crafted from the bones of the winged predator, was hurled by 10 men at once. It pierced the beast's eye, drove deep into its skull, and with a final roar that shook the world, the creature collapsed. Silence followed. Smoke rose from its body. The humans stood, broken, bleeding, but alive. They had killed a creature that had ruled the Deathworld itself. The probes transmitted the image of the beast's corpse lying before the fortress. The council chamber across the stars fell silent. No one laughed now. No one mocked. For they had seen what no other species had done. Humanity had faced the impossible, and won. The humans did not cheer. They set to work immediately, harvesting the plates for stronger walls, the bones for new weapons, the glands for more fire. Children sat near the body, tracing its shape in the dirt, marking its weak points for the next time. There was no triumph, only learning, only building. This was their way. And across the galaxy, the Watchers whispered what none dared speak aloud. If humans could defeat this, what else could they do? The great chamber of the Galactic Council had never been so silent. Once, it had echoed with laughter whenever the word human was spoken. Once, it had been a place where delegates mocked the elders, calling them frail and foolish for their warnings. But now the silence pressed on every wall, thick and heavy, as if the very stones carried fear. The latest transmissions still glowed across the vast projection screens, replaying the impossible battle again and again. A beast larger than any dreadnought, a creature that had ruled the Class 15 Deathworld for millennia, lay broken in the dirt. Around its body stood humans, blooded and scarred, yet alive. They had killed it. They had not only survived, they had triumphed. The councillors shifted uneasily in their seats. The insectoid delegations clicked their mandibles nervously. The reptilian warlords coiled their tails, restless and tense. The winged races folded their wings tight against their backs, unwilling to meet one another's eyes. Every species that had voted to cast humanity onto the Deathworld now felt the same crawling thought. What have we done? At last, a warlord stood, slamming his clawed fist against the table. It is trickery, he shouted, his voice trembling with a rage that barely masked his fear. The feeds are lies. No people can kill such a beast. The humans must be hiding weapons, technology stolen from the council's vaults. Another voice cut in, sharp and cold. Do you think the probes are blind? We have seen everything. They fought with bone and fire. They fought with patience and cunning. There was no deception. The humans did this. The warlord's scales flushed dark with anger, but he did not answer. He could not. From the elders' tier, one of the oldest councillors rose. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the chamber like the echo of thunder. I told you. We warned you. Again and again, you laughed. Again and again, you mocked. And now you see. Humanity does not break. Every strike against them only makes them stronger. Every hardship becomes their teacher. And every lesson brings them closer to what you fear most. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Delegates who had once shouted for humanity's destruction now whispered in doubt. What if we leave them there? One asked. Let them rot on that cursed world. Let them cage themselves in their fortress until the storms finally claim them. But another voice, trembling, replied, Did you not see? They are not rotting. They are thriving. They are building homes on a world that kills everything else. If they can live there, they can live anywhere. A silence followed that statement, heavier than before. It was the truth they all feared to admit. The Class 15 Deathworld was meant to be a grave. Instead, it had become humanity's forge. The warlords demanded new fleets be sent, demanded that orbital fire cleanse the surface and erase the humans once and for all. But even as they spoke, hesitation filled their words. 2 fleets had already vanished. A third had been shattered. If they launched another, would it suffer the same fate? Would the humans not only survive but grow even stronger from the assault? And beneath all their anger lay a deeper fear, one none of them dared speak aloud. What if humanity remembers? What if they decide to come back? The elders watched this fear spread and knew it was already too late. The council had unleashed something it could not control. They had given humans the harshest punishment they could imagine, and the humans had turned it into strength. Now the galaxy itself would pay the price. Above the Deathworld, the probes continued to send images. The humans were rebuilding again, carving stronger walls, forging sharper weapons, planting hard crops in poisoned soil. Children laughed faintly in the background of the recordings, not with joy, but with the fierce sound of those who had learned to endure. Families ate together, sharing meat cooked over bitter fires. Hunters left in groups, armed and prepared, returning with trophies of beasts that once ruled the land. The impossible had become routine. The counselors turned away from the screens, unable to watch. But they could not close their ears to the whispers spreading across the chamber, whispers that grew louder each day. What if the elders are right? What if the humans do not stop here? What if this is only the beginning? Fear had finally replaced laughter. And in that fear, the galaxy began to understand the truth. Humanity was not their victim. Humanity was their doom. The Class 15 Deathworld had been chosen as a grave. That was the Council's intent, to cast humanity onto a world where storms could split mountains, where oceans boiled with monsters, where the very air was poison and the ground itself tried to kill. No other species had lasted longer than a day there. Yet weeks had passed, and the probes circling above showed something the galaxy had no words for. Humanity had not only endured, they had begun to settle. The camp was no longer just a fortress of wreckage and bones. It had grown into something alive. The wall, once a crude barrier, was now layered with the armor of fallen beasts, its surface gleaming with oils that repelled the acidic rain. Towers of rib bone and scavenged struts jutted upward, giving humans high ground to watch the horizon. Trenches lined the outer ring, filled with sharpened stakes dipped in venom. Inside, shelters had multiplied, covered in hides that shimmered faintly in the stormlight. Fires burned clean and steady, their smoke carefully directed through filters so it would not draw predators. And among all this, children laughed. That sound, faint through the probe microphones, sent chills through the galaxy. No species had ever raised children on a Deathworld. No species had ever dared. Yet human children carried water in jars, fed scraps of cooked meat to hunting dogs bred from local scavengers, and sketched crude maps in the dirt under the watch of their elders. Food grew. That was the greatest shock. The soil, catalogued as sterile and venomous, now sprouted green. Rows of hardy crops struggled upward, their roots treated with ash and filtered water, their leaves trembling under the poisonous wind but refusing to wither. Humans had tested endlessly, planting again and again until they found a method that worked. Now they ate not only beast meat but bread baked in crude ovens of stone. The cameras captured a woman breaking a loaf in half, handing it to two children. The world gasped. Bread on a Class 15 Deathworld. The probes recorded more. Hunters set out in disciplined groups, clad in cloaks of stitched hide. They moved like shadows across the ridges, laying traps, marking the paths of massive predators. They returned each night dragging carcasses, their faces painted with ash to hide their scent. Others gathered venom sacs and strange glowing roots, grinding them together into pastes that hardened into sealants for armor. The galaxy whispered in disbelief. Humanity was not surviving anymore. They were thriving. In the council chamber, fear became argument. "This is unnatural," one delegate shouted, his wings flaring. "No people can tame such a world." Another snapped back, "Then explain the fields they plant. Explain the shelters. Explain the children still alive." The chamber broke into chaos, voices rising, tails lashing, claws striking tables. And through it all, the elders sat in silence. They had warned of this. They had begged the council not to test humanity. Now the proof was written across the stars. The impossible had been witnessed. On the feeds, a scene played that silenced even the noisiest voices. A human woman stood in a small clearing inside the walls, holding an infant in her arms. The storms raged outside, beasts roared in the distance, yet inside the fortress the child slept, calm against her chest. She looked up once, directly at the probe that floated unseen above, and though her eyes were tired, they burned with something unshakable. Defiance. Strength. A promise. The watchers across the galaxy shivered. If humanity could raise children on a Class 15 Deathworld, then there was no world they could not claim. Weeks turned to months. The fortress became a village. The village became the seed of a city. Smoke rose in controlled plumes, lights flickered at night in patterns too regular to be chance, and songs carried faintly in the feed when the wind dropped. Songs on a world of death. That was the moment many counselors understood the truth. Humanity would not die here. Humanity would live. Humanity would expand. And one day, humanity would leave. In taverns and marketplaces across the stars, whispers grew into rumors. The humans have done the impossible. The Deathworld is theirs now. If they can tame a Class 15, what could stop them from taming our worlds? Fear crept into every empire, cold and silent. They had sent humans to die. Instead, they had given them a throne built from hell. The probes sent one last chilling image. Children running in the poisoned rain, laughing as they wore small cloaks stitched from the hides of slain beasts. Their laughter carried faintly through the speakers of 1,000 worlds. For the galaxy, it was terror. For humanity, it was life. And the elders whispered, "Now it begins."